big hello to you. It's so great to see you and I hope I find you well. I'm Jenny Kirk, welcoming you up here to Weir Yard. Now, I'm guessing that we're all fairly familiar with TOPS numbers that appear on locomotives and multiple units. These are the 5 or 6 figure numbers that help identify the class number of the locomotive plus its individual number, and these combine together to make an easy to recognize and unique number which allows these locomotives to be tracked on a computer database so that the owning companies know exactly where they are and what they're suitable for doing. But have you ever noticed on rolling stock there is a 3-letter code, and have you wondered just what that is for? Well, this is also part of the TOPS system, and today I'm going to be delving into these and explaining to you just what these 3-letter codes actually mean, because there's a lot of information stored here, and just like on the real railway, these give you some vital clues which are actually quite important for making up your own trains authentically. These 3 letters are vitally important, not just on the computer database, but also for shunters on the ground to be able to visually identify a wagon's type. And this could be quite important if, for example, it's being used for a particular traffic flow, and those letters will translate out into a computer system that would let the operator know whether this wagon is indeed suitable for that particular task. It also gives information about the braking systems, and this is also incredibly important for something as simple as whether it's going to cause a problem with the continuous brakes in a long train if a particular wagon is marshalled in a particular location. Today we're going to delve into all of this and go on a voyage of discovery, and I'm going to be using some of the ready-to-run wagons that I've got to hand up here in Weir Yard and show you those 3-letter TOPS codes and go through with you just what all of these mean. Today's video comes in association with Train-O-Matic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double-O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
So can you tell your ABC from your XYZ? Those 3-letter codes, they shouldn't be a mystery anymore. Let's delve into the world of these and explain why this is important for your own model train formations. Please hit that like button, share this video, and if you haven't already done so, do please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. You can also check out our full merch store just down there underneath the video, and we're also over on Patreon if you want to help support the channel. But let's get on and unravel the mystery of those 3-letter codes. As part of TOPS, this was a way that BR could keep a track of wagons and also know exactly at a glance what the wagon was for, and to get an idea of the braking system. And this is important for when they were making up trains. And on your model layout as well, there are a few boo-boos that you can create if you're not quite certain just what these 3 letters mean. Probably one of the most important letters in this 3-letter code is the final one, and this is to do with the braking system that the wagon has. There's a number of different letters that can be used in this position, and across these 4 wagons you can see 3 different ones, and these are vitally important for the shunters in terms of making up the consist of a train, working out its braking force, and whether that train will be able to be stopped by the controls in the locomotive when out on the main line. The first letter is the overarching type of wagon. This is a broad umbrella term which groups together similar wagons that usually are intended for the carrying similar types of loads. And what you see here, every single one of these wagons has the B code as the first letter of their trio of letters. The second letter is to denote what the specific type of wagon is within that overarching broad first letter code. So in this instance, all 4 of these wagons are coded with the B at the start, but the second letter is different on each one. And we can see at a glance that all 4 of these wagons are subtly different in design. So the BBA, it's a bogie wagon, and the B can be considered to stand for bogie flat type wagons. You'd want to know exactly what type of wagon it was, given that it would be very specific to the type of freight flows that it was going to be used for, and you couldn't send the coil flat wagon to be used for things like steel girder loads, which might be carried on some of these others. In addition, there might be restrictions in terms of the length of what's going to be carried. If you had a very long aluminium ingot, then it might be too long to carry on the BEV down here, which is quite a short bogie bolster wagon. The BDA is much longer, but then you have to consider the third letter for the braking system. The A means that this is equipped with air brakes, whereas the V means that these are equipped only with a vacuum brake. The O means that this is unbraked, other than a handbrake, and effectively that would form an unfitted portion of a train. When marshalling the wagons together into a train, you need all of the wagons which have a working braking system for the train brakes next to the locomotive, and that means that they can be piped together or bagged up to allow the driver of the locomotive to be able to apply the brakes on that portion of the train when they apply the brakes on the locomotive and help stop the train. If you had the wrong type of braking system, then for example have a vacuum braked wagon marshalled in between 2 air braked wagons, that would effectively form a barrier between the two. The first air brake wagon might be perfectly piped to the locomotive with the brakes working, but with a vacuum braked wagon in between, the next air braked wagon would effectively be running as if it was unfitted. The next type of overarching wagons that I want to look at are those where the 3-letter code begins with a C, and I've got 4 different ones here in front of us to take a look at. As you can see, that all 4 of them are very different designs from each other because they're all designed to carry very different cargoes. But the C, being an overarching designation, can be considered for covered wagons. And this is different from a van, which is also a type of covered wagon, but we're going to deal with that separately because they have their own designation. These 4 different wagons, I'm going to take the first one. This is a grain wagon. It's a type of hopper, but it's covered, and these were used to carry grain. The second letter of the code is a G. And one of the things that you often find is that the second letter can often give a clue to the kind of commodity. Not always, but it does seem that those who originally drew up these codes did try and make them so it was just a little bit more obvious what was going on. CGO, the third letter, means that this is unbraked. The next wagon here is a sand wagon, and it's coded as a cov hop in the pre-tops lingo, and that probably is why the second letter on this is a H, cov hop. This has vacuum brakes denoted by the V at the end. Again, you can see it's a type of covered hopper, rather like that grain wagon. This wagon is coded CPV, and when you know that its previous designation was a press flow or a pressure flow hopper, then the P makes a lot more sense. C, P, and the V means that this too has vacuum brakes. This next wagon is a little bit curious. It's coded with the overarching C, but actually bears more to its design to a van. And whilst vans have a separate designation which will be dealt with later, and for whatever reason gunpowder wagons were instead coded with the covered merchandise wagons. So we get a CXV, and that means it's got vacuum brakes and vacuum brakes only. Another strange anomaly within the C overarching code designation are brake vans for the revenue fleet. All of these are coded with the C, and then an A is always the second letter, regardless of any other quirks of the brake van. One thing that these do is let me talk a little bit more about some of the other braking options, as brake vans quite often had some of the different piping options. The first of these that I'm going to pick up is coded CAR. CA for the revenue fleet brake van, but the R means that this is through piped for both air and for vacuum. It doesn't actually have brakes on it that are enacted by the locomotive, but it can transmit those braking systems through, and they would most likely have valves within them that would allow the guard to be able to apply the brakes for the train as well. The branding on this brake van also alludes to that air braked part of the piping, where it says to work with air brake trains only. Looking to the next wagon, we've got CAP. The P means that this is through vacuum piped, but nothing else. Again, that means that the guard would be able to destroy the vacuum on the train brakes and apply the brakes for the rest of the train, even though the only brake that the brake van has is the hand brake, which is wound down from within, that only acts on the van itself. We've got another CAP coded brake van here. This has plywood sides, but even though it has the differences to the planked side wagon, it's still coded CAP. The final of this quartet is coded CAO, and that means that this does not have any through brakes or indeed any train activated brakes at all, and that would mean that this would effectively form a barrier between wagons in front of it and wagons behind it for the braking system. The next overarching tops code I'm going to look at are those beginning with F, and these can be regarded as being flat wagons. And again, it's quite a broad ranging designation, and these include four-wheel wagons right up to bogie wagons. Unfortunately, not many wagons are released in model form with the three-letter codes on the side, and these are the only two that I can find in my fleet. First up, this is a motor rail flat wagon, and we've got the tops code FVV. F for the flat wagon, V is the specific designation of this wagon, and V for the braking system. This one, same type of wagon, so we've got the F for the flat wagon, V because it's the same type of wagon, but this includes an X on the end. X means that this has both vacuum and air brakes, so it can be marshalled into an air brake fitted train or a vacuum brake fitted train, and the brakes will work with either system. When we come to the overarching codes beginning with H, these are hopper wagons, but unlike the CPV or the CGO that we looked at before, these are open hoppers. Generally these would be for things like aggregates or iron ore or gravel. The wagons that I've got laid out in front of me show some of the different variations. Again, they're all within the overarching H code, but they have somewhat different designs. This top one is a HUO, so its specific designation is U, and its brake designation is O, or completely unbraked with no through piping. This one is coded HAA, and these should be quite familiar to most people. A very, very common wagon, and certainly a very long lasting one. I want to focus on these three wagons. Outwardly, they all look exactly the same, but you'll notice all three have a subtly different tops code. The reason for this is entirely down to what these are designed to carry, and also to do with the braking system and the suspension. So in this instance, HBA is a hopper, B is its specific designation, and the A means that this is only air brake. Moving to this one, we've got a code of HEA. Again, hopper, specific designation E, and A for air brake. But between these two, what we would have in real life would be differences between the suspension and the braking system, which would change the speed with which these wagons would be allowed to travel at. This final wagon is coded HSA, and in this instance the S meant that this had been adapted for carrying scrap metal. Because of the nature of this, with the bottom doors welded up, you wouldn't be able to load this with coal because there'd be no way of unloading it. I, J and K all exist as wagon designations, but because I don't do modern image, I don't have any examples to show you. Moving on to those coded beginning with M, I've got a number of examples here that are available in model form. Those along the bottom here, these are all 16-ton mineral wagons, but with their tops codes, they have 3 different distinct codes. This particular one, coded M, and that can be thought of as being a mineral wagon. X is the specific type, and V means that this is vacuum fitted. Moving to the next coal wagon, again M because it's the mineral wagon. C actually denotes that this wagon would in reality have clasp brakes, and the reason that this would be important to differentiate it from this is down to the braking capacity. Different types of braking systems would mean that they could apply a greater or lesser braking force, and that could be important for the makeup of the train, especially if the train includes fitted and unfitted wagons, because there's a special calculation to be able to work out the braking force that's needed to stop the train. MCO is the designation for a 16-ton mineral wagon that doesn't have any train brakes. It's completely unbraked and there's no through piping. Moving to the next row, we've got 2 wagons which outwardly do look quite similar. One is coded MDV and the other is coded MEO. Again, M for mineral wagon, and then D and E are for the specific types of wagon. In these instances, the D and the E denotes the different carrying capacities of these wagons, with one being a 21-ton wagon and the other being 24 tons. And again, that could be quite important to avoid overloading of the wagons, and the extra capacity could be important for the traffic flow. This wagon is coded MSV, and just as we said before, sometimes the second letter is something that alludes to the load that goes into these particular types of wagons. This particular one would often run with stone traffic, and you can see there the stone branding, and MSV you could think of as being a stone tippler wagon. It doesn't have the side doors that the 16-ton wagons that it looks similar to have, and that would mean that these wagons can only be unloaded by turning upside down. They also have a much higher weight because they've got uprated springs. Final example that I've got in my collection is this, coded MFA. These were cut down from MEAs, and of course the second letter therefore differentiates between the 2 outwardly fairly similar wagons, the MEA being a taller version of the MFA. The next designation I'm going to be looking at is those coded with an N, and this can be thought of as standing for non-passenger carrying coaching stock. Essentially, these were used for parcels or newspaper traffic, and they were coaching stock that passengers would not be riding in. Now, there's lots of different subtle codes between the different types of vans, and these denote all sorts of subtle things, even down to the arrangement of whether they had internal shelving. So the examples that I've got here, we've got a large bogie van, multiple doors down the side, no corridor connections, and this particular van is coded NFV. We have a Mark 1 BG. This is branded for newspapers, and when we look at the tops code, we've got NCX. We have a four-wheel van here, coded NAV, a different type of four-wheel van, coded NOV. Again, that second letter is down to the specific differences between the actual vans and usually denoted what kind of specific traffic these were for. The V on each of these means that they all have vacuum braking only. This is coded OOV, and that means it's vacuum brake. The specific wagon is coded with the O, the center letter, and the overarching type is O for open wagon. There are a lot of different types of wagons that fall within the O. All of them are open type wagons. You shouldn't be fooled by the hood. That doesn't count. The wagon that's underneath is an open wagon. Now what's interesting is that OOV was not the original classification of these wagons. And you can see here that this particular wagon, which is ostensibly the same wagon, is coded UCV. You could regard as being an uncovered, C for clay, and the V for the vacuum brakes, were all recoded into the OOV range of wagons. And this was done because BR decided to get rid of the U classification, and the wagons that were within that could quite easily be moved into other overarching categories for neatness of use. And this does mean that any wagon coded UCV predates the date at which they were recoded, which I believe was in the very early 1980s. And again, for those who want to keep prototypical accuracy, this too can be quite important. Whilst a wagon coded UCV might have continued to run with that branding, a wagon coded OOV could not have run before the date at which that branding was beginning to be applied. Other open wagons that have been made available ready to run, we have the OAA, the OBA and the OCA. Again, we can see three subtly different types of open wagons with the center letter denoting the differences between them. All three of these would have air brakes and have the A coding as the final letter of their three-letter tops code. The next coding group is P, and this can be thought of as being any wagon that's privately owned, i.e. not owned by the railway company. And there are a number of wagons that fell into this category. As you can see, they were quite varied, and they could be anything from tankers to vans to open hoppers to covered hoppers and anything in between. The P was pretty much a catch-all for privately owned wagons that were registered to run on Britain's railways. These two instances are a grain wagon coded PAF. The P because it's privately owned, the A denotes the specific wagon, and the F is another different type of braking, which is fast acting vacuum brakes. As far as I'm aware, these were compatible with vacuum piped wagons that were coded with a P at the end, and also wagons that had a V at the end, so you could mix them in. The whole point of the F brakes was that it was a vacuum brake that applied much quicker due to the way it worked. This wagon is a bogie hopper wagon. We've got a tops code of PHV. P because it's privately owned, H to denote the very specific type of wagon, and V because this is vacuum braked only. Q is one of three special overarching codes applied to departmental or engineer stock. This is stock that was used by the railway but was not for revenue earning service. Q was reserved for coaching stock that was in departmental use. This example is coded QFV, and this is an N parts wagon. This would be used to take spare parts between main works and outline works for things like repairs. Just as before, the Q denotes that this is a departmental non-revenue coach. F is the specific type of coach within that, and V means that it has vacuum brakes only. R is another peculiarity. Again, as you can see here, we've got a mix of three very different types of vehicles. But what unifies the R overarching code is that these are all being used as barrier wagons of some description. That effectively means that they're being used either as a spacer in a train or as a reach type wagon, or in the case of these, as a means to translate different forms of couplings between what the train is pulling and the locomotive. Quite often these are former revenue earning wagons, but as you can see they also extended to brake vans and also wagons which had been specifically converted for the role. In these three instances, the first one is a Queen Mary brake van, and this has received the TOPS code of RPW. R because it falls within the barrier wagon remit, P for the specific type, and W is the braking system. This is one that we've not shown before, and this means that this wagon has vacuum brakes that work off the train, so could be controlled from the locomotive, but also included a through air pipe. That wouldn't be actually acting on the brake van, but it means if air braked wagons were behind it in the consist, their brakes would still be operable by the locomotive. This bottom wagon is a translator wagon used between different types of couplings. This is coded RGQ. R because it falls within the barrier wagon overarching code, G for the specific type of wagon, and Q, again another code we've not come across. This is similar to the P code, but instead of being through vacuum piped, it means that this possesses only a through air pipe. That means again it could be in the consist of an air brake train, and whereas its brakes wouldn't be applied, it would not stop the wagons after it from having working air brakes. The final of this trio is coded RBV, and in this instance it's a former Blue Spot Fish van or a parcels van as they later became, and the purpose of this recoding is so that these wouldn't end up in revenue stock and disappear into the system being used as a regular van. So they were recoded to an RBV so that they would always be available for the specific traffic flow that they were needed for. Quite often this would include being a barrier wagon in a train, so that you would have it as effectively a spacer between something like a tanker wagon and the locomotive, or it could be used as a reach wagon to be able to shunt and spot wagons somewhere where the locomotive was too heavy to go. Things like coal drops, where if a locomotive strayed onto the coal drop, it was too heavy and would be liable to fall through the rails. So they used extra wagons such as these to be able to spot the coal hoppers to where they needed to be, but without actually running the risk of putting the locomotive somewhere where it could damage the track. S was a code that was applied to specific steel carrying wagons. In this instance, the STV is different from any of those open wagons or the O coded wagons. The TOPS code is applied to specifically make sure that this wagon is used on a specific flow. T is for tankers, quite self-explanatory, and probably the most common of all the tankers are the TTAs and the TEAs. Whilst this wagon doesn't have branding on it is a TEA, and I wanted to show you the differences between these two different types of wagon. Again, the T overarching as a tanker, the second letter denotes the specific type, E type, T type, and the final one is for the braking system. In this case we've got an A for air braked only. This particular wagon again doesn't have a TOPS code on, but if it was in the revenue fleet would be coded TTV. And it's interesting that you can end up with wagons which outwardly look quite different, but they have the same first two letter code, but the braking code is different. What it means is that this wagon can only be used in an air brake train, or it would become an unbraked wagon. In addition, if it was in a vacuum fitted train, any wagon behind it would become unbraked. Similarly, this wagon would only be able to run in a vacuum fitted train. If it was used in an air brake train, it would again form a barrier to the braking, and all wagons after it would be unbraked. The V overarching code is for vans, and again there's a lot of different variety here, and it's the second letter that we look to for giving us the differentiation between the subtly different types. These long wheelbase wagons are the air braked wagons, and we've got TOPS code VAA, and this is a particular type of wagon. We're going to look, and we've got vents on the end and the big sliding wall doors. Looking to this particular wagon, this is coded VBB. V for van, B for the specific type of wagon, and this looks pretty much the same side on to the VAA, but it doesn't have those vents. So what we know is that the B and the A designate whether it does or doesn't have those end vents. The B means that this is air braked, but with through vacuum piping. It can run in a vacuum brake train and would allow vacuum brake wagons behind it to also be braked from the locomotive, but it in effect would be just running as a through piped wagon, and its own brakes would not act when the train braked. This wagon is coded VBA, and again, like that other one, we've not got any vents, but this doesn't have the through vacuum piping, which means it couldn't run in a vacuum train without interrupting the vacuum brake. This wagon is coded VDA. Again, it's subtly different. You can see very different ends, and we've got a different arrangement of doors along the side. We've also got this coded VEA. This is a very short wheelbase van, and the E is the designation for that. Looking at the TOPS computer system, it would show this as being instantly a wagon that has a shorter wheelbase, is perfect for being used by customers that have particularly tight curves on their internal rail system that would preclude the use of the long wheelbase vans. Therefore, it's important to be able to differentiate between these two types of vans. Moving on to vacuum braked vans, we've again got three different codes for what outwardly at least do look fairly similar. This particular van is coded VVV, and this is probably the most common of the van designations for any vacuum braked vans. Add to it the mix, we've got these coded VMV, and these, as you can see, have a different type of opening doors. This particular van is coded VEV. Again, there will be subtle differences between the two that code differentiates between, which would be important for different traffic flows. Y is the second of the engineer's codes, which I talked about when I introduced you to the Q-coded departmental coaches. Y again is a catch-all for any engineer's or departmental wagon that has bogies. So I've got a few examples here, and you can see the variety from bogie bolsters to well trolls and to different versions of the war well. We've also got this bogie hopper wagon. Looking to this, we've got a TOPS code of YGH. Y because it's a bogie departmental wagon, G for the specific type of wagon which matches up with this hopper, and then H is another new code for the braking system. H means that this has got the AFI fast acting vacuum brakes that we saw introduced with the F TOPS code. In this instance, it also has air brakes, and just as we saw before, that means that this could run in an air brake train and not interrupt the air braking to the wagons behind it. This wagon is a modified war well with a flat platform on top, and we've got a TOPS code of YSO. S is the designation for this particular type of wagon, O means it's unbraked, and of course Y is because it's a bogie wagon in the departmental fleet. Even though this is also a war well, because it's got the different adaptations, it's got a different TOPS code, and we've got YYV. Y because it's got a different setup on it, and the V because this has vacuum brakes. This bogie bolster has a TOPS code of YXR. It's based on a well troll, but being in the engineer's fleet, it's got the code Y, X for the specific type of wagon, and R because it's both air and vacuum piped. The final wagon of this quartet is this bogie bolster, formerly coded BEV. When passed into the engineer's fleet, it's been recoded to YRV. It still retains its vacuum brakes, so we've got the V for the brakes, Y for the engineer's bogie fleet, and R designates what the specific wagon would be used for. Z is the final TOPS code, and it's also the final of the 3 departmental engineers fleet TOPS designation. It's quite a large catch-all, but this covers 4-wheeled wagons in the engineers fleet. These can be quite varied. This is a long wheelbase van, but it's coded as a ZYX. Just as before, we've got Z because it's a 4-wheel engineers wagon, Y for its specific use, and X because this features both vacuum and air brakes. We can look at this van. We've got quite an ornate livery on this for the rail stores, but this is coded ZRB. R for the specific use of this van, and B because this features air brakes with vacuum piping. Another different van, another different use, this time coded ZQV. This van is coded ZDV. We can also have ostensibly exactly the same wagon, but the TOPS code can vary not just because of the braking system, but also because of its specific use. This wagon's coded ZCO, whereas this wagon, which is pretty much the same other than vacuum brakes, is instead coded ZDV. Again, this one coded ZCO. Another open wagon coded ZGV. A ballast hopper. Because this is a 4-wheeled ballast hopper, we have the Z code, F for the specific type of ballast hopper, and O because it's unbraked. This code also includes brake vans that fall within the engineer's fleet. In this instance, ZTP. T for the very specific type of brake van, P because this is vacuum piped, but doesn't have its own train brakes. This is a very different design of brake van. It's coded ZT because again it's a particular type of brake van which would be used for exactly the same purpose as this. The difference is that this is coded O, so it doesn't have any piping or any train brakes. Shark ballast vans used for ploughing freshly laid ballast to spread it out on the track. These are coded ZU, and the difference between these two is the A or the V to denote that this one will run on vacuum brakes, whereas this one will only run on air brakes. I hope you really enjoyed today's video and found it useful, and certainly these 3-letter codes need not be a mystery anymore. And as you saw in that video, they can be really, really important, not just for identifying traffic flow suitability, but that 3rd letter, the braking code, is really, really vital when you're making up trains. Now, a lot of these different wagons can be mixed and matched into a mixed freight train that's, say, tripping from one yard to the next. But if that brake letter doesn't match up, you could be introducing, say, a vacuum braked wagon into the middle of your air brake train and effectively rendering all of the wagons after that as unbraked. And this is really, really important, not just in the real world, but if you're looking to run prototypically accurate trains, it's something perhaps that you should keep an eye on. And it's really easy with these 3-letter codes. Of course, previous to their introduction, it was really down to a lot of local knowledge to actually understand what could and couldn't be run together. Do leave a comment down below. It's always great to hear from you, whether this is something perhaps that's all new to you and you've learnt something from this video, and maybe it's going to influence the rolling stock that you're running in your trains, or perhaps it's given you some pointers towards some wagons that you've suddenly realised that you really need in your fleet. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying thanks again for watching. Please hit the like button, share this video, subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so, and check out our full merch store down below. Until next time, happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Train-O-Matic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest logo.
I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/Jennifer Kirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.